To the cloud.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. Do we need to give people a few minutes to kind of join in, or are they in?
I show 49 and climbing for attendees.
Okay, well, I'll give it a minute just for everybody to get in. And then will you share your screen, or are you sharing your screen and I just can't tell?
I'm not sharing the PowerPoint yet. Shall I do that before you do the introductions?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, you can go ahead and share the screen. That'll be fine. That'll be great. Okay. Well, welcome everybody to this Lunch and Learn with the Texas State Board of Examiners of Marriage and Family Therapists. Hopefully you're all getting in here. Is there a way to put that on presentation mode, Sarah?
Oh.
Yes, from beginning.
Perfect.
There you go.
Okay, so my name is Dr. Lisa Merchant, and I am a professional member and the presiding officer of the Texas State Board of Examiners of Marriage and Family Therapists. And I have with me today Dr. Elder and Dr. Barty. Dr. Elder, Dr. Barty, would you like to introduce yourselves?
Sure. So I'm Jody Elder. I'm a professional member of the board. I'm also a professor at SMU, adjunct faculty, and a private practitioner.
And I am Russ Barty, and also a professional member and faculty at Texas Wesleyan University and private practitioner as well.
Fantastic. We also have with us today Mrs. Fassholz, who is the executive director of the board. And then we also have Mr. Tim Spear, who is also with us. Would either of you like to introduce yourselves?
Good afternoon. I'm Sarah. I'm the board administrator.
Hello, my name is Tim Spear. I'm the Director of Operations for the Behavioral Health Executive Council.
Okay. Well, thank you all for joining us today. This is, oh, Sarah, can you go to the next slide? I forgot I can't do it. Okay, so this is our agenda for today. Really briefly, I just want to kind of go over the rulemaking process. So as we're talking about some of the rules that are kind of have recently been passed or that are upcoming, you'll kind of understand where they are in the rulemaking process. And then we're going to talk about some of the recent and upcoming rule changes that you probably need to be aware of, some proposed rules that are just now beginning the rulemaking process, and then some future directions, things that we are thinking about as a board. I'm thinking this first part will take about 30 minutes. And then after that, we're going to reserve the last half hour of our presentation for you guys to be able to ask questions. You're welcome to put questions into the Q&A, and Mr. Spear or Ms. Fassholz will answer those. But we'll also be taking questions for like I said, about the last half hour. Next slide. So in brief, this is the rulemaking process. I'm just going to kind of, again, this is like maybe if it were to work out perfectly, this is kind of what the rulemaking process would look like. Keeping in mind that things do not always work out this smoothly. So, but essentially a way a rule generally gets made is that the board will propose some sort of rule. You know, sometimes it starts in a committee, but we'll essentially come up with a rule. We'll meet on it. We'll decide on it. From there, it goes to BHEC, and BHEC will approve the rule, or sometimes they send it back to the board to look over it again. After BHEC approves the rule, then it has to go to the governor's office, and they look through the rule just to make sure that it's not, it's not anti-competitive, or that it's consistent with other statutes. And essentially, they look through the rule and they approve it, or they can send it back. After the governor's office approves a rule, then it goes to the Texas registrar for public comment. If you would like to give public comment, there are really good instructions on our webpage. Also, if you are subscribed to our email service, then you will get, when things go to public comment, you will get an email saying things have gone to public comment. And then you can log on and make those, read through the rule and leave comment on if you agree or disagree. After the public comment period ends, it goes back to the board and the board reviews the public comment, and then we either approve or we amend the rule. And then it goes back to BHEC for them to approve. And then after BHEC approves it, then the rule becomes effective. So anyways, that's just kind of the general rulemaking process. When this process works out well, we can generally create a rule in maybe like 6 to 9 months. But if it has to kind of go back and forth, then it can take much longer. So next slide.
Oops.
Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Russ, I'm going to turn it over to Jody, who's going to talk about continuing education.
All right, everybody. So we have recently enacted some new rules. There is a standardization committee that is a partnership among all of the member boards under BHEC, which includes social work, psychology, MFT, and LPC. And those boards have gotten together for the purpose of standardizing some of the rules so that the staff is not having to say, okay, well, these are the CEs required for this particular board. What about this one? What about this one? And if they're all different, it takes up so much more staff time. So all of the boards have gotten together, had opinions and thoughts about here's where we can standardize. We are still keeping very unique aspects of each profession, but also trying to look at where we can streamline. And CEs was one of the areas where the standardization committee has been hard at work. These new rules are in place for MFTs and are coming down the pike for the other boards as well. So now there are 30 total CE hours required, only 15 for LMFT associates. Of those 30, 6 of them need to be in ethics, 3 in diversity, 2 are related to technology assisted services, which we call TAS, if and only if you are providing technology assisted services. If that's not something you're doing, then these CEs are not required. But if you are doing it, then you need the continuing education to make sure you're doing that competently. If you're a supervisor, an LMFT supervisor, then you need 6 hours of your CEs in supervision. And that is of the total 30. That's not separate from the total 30. And then there's a course in sex trafficking that is a state requirement that came to all the boards from the Texas legislature. And so on the board website, if you go look, there is a link to a free sex trafficking CE that you can get. It usually takes an hour, hour and a half tops. So that's available for you as well. There is specific language in rules that give this second bullet that gives some clarification about the diversity, the 3 CEs for diversity that are required. So you can see there's a broad array of trainings that you could get that would fall under there. And then supervisors, only supervisors have to take that JP exam every renewal period. And that can count up to 1 hour of your ethics CEs, which the whole point is to make sure that you're keeping abreast of the Texas LMFT rules. And then up to 10, and this is brand new, of your 30, let's say for one renewal cycle of that 2-year renewal cycle, maybe you end up with 40 or 50 hours because you got a specific training. And you think, man, there's 20 or 15, how many ever extra hours that you got, now you can count up to 10 hours. So let's say you got your full 30 and you had 15 left over, 10 of that can be counted towards your next renewal cycle, so that you would only be required to get 20 that next renewal cycle. So keep that in mind. I think that's a great benefit. And then you must retain your records of your continuing education for up to 3 years, because there's a specific percentage of licensees who are chosen randomly for audits of their CEs. You do not submit your CE hours unless you're asked to do so. You just have to attest as part of your renewal that you have completed the required CEs. And then if you're chosen for an audit, you need to have those records on hand to provide to the board to support that testament of, yes, I got my CEs. Go ahead, Sarah. Thank you. So this is new. Part of what happened when you look historically over the timeline of how the boards have handled continuing education. Previously, what we had was an approved CE provider list, and anybody who sent in their money and completed the application were added to the approved provider list. And there really wasn't any oversight of who was on the list, there certainly wasn't any oversight of what kind of CEs they were providing or the quality or anything like that. And so what we decided to do as a board was, when we were looking at how can we streamline staff time, because we wanted to make sure that staff had as much time and energy to focus to processing applications and processing ethical complaints and completing investigations. We realized that there wasn't a ton of benefit coming from the approved provider list. And so we got rid of it and just said, anybody who gets CEs, the CE provider needs to provide a certificate, needs to make sure it pertains to the practice, that kind of thing.
I think Jody froze.
Did we lose her? I think we did.
I think
Yeah.
we lost Jody.
So I think she was explaining that at the point in time that it was up to the licensee to find the CE provider, and we were not providing any approval process. There were a lot of questions and concerns about, well, how do I know if this is going to count when I finally do renew? So this is what we've done. What's in rules now with this provider list is kind of a compromise, that you're not completely out in the wild, wild west, that you will, if you have 50% come from these associations, you can be relatively assured that those will count toward your renewal and staff won't reject them at the last hour. So I think that was all we wanted to say about that. The hospital and hospital system, that being an addition, that's an addition to the list that is in the rulemaking process right now. So that will be out for public comment in the next few weeks or month. And then the effective date for just this subsection, not the entire rule section on CEs, but just this provider list section. The effective date is January 1st, 2024. That addition to the rule is in process as well. And that's so that we don't trip anyone up whose renewal, say, is December 31st of 2022, and then suddenly 50% of their CEs have to come from this list. We didn't want to set a trip hazard up for certain licensees.
Great.
Anything else on this one?
No, let's go to the next page. There are some other things that will also count. Anyways, this list is actually pretty similar to what the list was previously. Again, we just try to kind of standardize it across the different boards. But essentially, the passage of the jurisprudence exam, that can count for an hour. If you give some sort of presentation or do some sort of continuing education activity, you can count up to 5 hours for that. Authoring a book or a peer-reviewed article, you can count up to 5 hours. Teaching or attending a graduate level course, up to 5 hours. Self-study, which would be like reading a book or reading a journal article, that you can also count 1 hour of that. And then again, that when you do the sex trafficking or the human trafficking training, then you can also count an hour of that towards your CEUs. And these are given on a 1-to-1 hour basis. So 1 hour of the activity counts as 1 hour of CEUs. So,
and just to clarify, earlier we mentioned that the supervisors are required to take the jurisprudence exam every renewal period, but that's not to say that other licensees cannot take the jurisprudence exam if they'd like to grab this 1 hour of credit.
Correct. Okay, next slide.
Okay, I'll take this one. One of the things that's going to be interesting that is coming up right around the corner, because you see the effective date of January 1, 2023, that is like in about 3 or 4 weeks. So I'm speaking, this one is for supervisors for sure, perk up if you're supervising LMFT associates. But if you are an LMFT associate, understand that effective January 1, you will need to add this language to your taglines on all of your marketing and all of the way in which you present yourself to the citizens of the state of Texas. This is web pages, business cards, brochures, email, all these other type of things. You'll need to put supervised by the name of the supervisor. So for example, if I were an LMFT associate, I would put Russ Barty, LMFT associate, supervised by Murray Bowen, LMFTS. And that would show up everywhere in all of my marketing. Do note that it is LMFT associate. It's not LMFT-A. It's not LMFT-A. It does need to be spelled out LMFT space associate in all of this. So if you have, if you're looking for a nice stocking stuffer gift from somebody who loves you and cares for you, they can foot the bill for updating your business cards. Because all of your business cards, if you're an associate, will need to be carrying this special tagline, and that is coming up around the corner.
Okay, next slide.
Okay, here's another clarification that we did which is effective now, and there's been some questions about what defines a relational hour when LMFT associates are counting relational hours. I'm going to read the language, and then I'll give you I know it's there, and I hate reading a slide, but I'm going to read a slide just to make sure. Hours in which a clinician delivers therapeutic services with 2 or more individuals simultaneously, or 2 or more individuals from the same family system within the same therapeutic session. This is what direct services to couples and families are going to be. Individuals must share an ongoing relationship beyond that which occurs in the therapeutic experience itself. In other words, you can't limit it just to what's going on in the session. They have to have some relationship outside of the counseling session. Examples of ongoing relationships include family systems, couple systems, enduring friendship, community support systems, and residential treatment or situationally connected systems. Now, that's the official language. So on the right side, it says, okay, so what would be some examples? Well, if married, dating, cohabiting, premarital, that would be relational with all this. Families of all shapes and sizes, aunts, uncles, grandparents, mothers, fathers, if they're part of that biological system or that marital based system, that would be. Roommates, friends, co-workers. Really? Co-workers? Yes. Isn't that interesting? Group therapy in a residential treatment program. This is really good because many of you are getting jobs at treatment centers and you're asked to do groups and you're wondering why can't I count that as a relational hour? You can as of right now. Group therapy sessions in a 12-week job readiness program, for example, that's not specific. Multi-couple groups, if you're doing couples, if you have 6 couples and you're doing a couple session of parenting or dealing with finances or something where you have multiple, that is relational. Sessions split between individual play and individual parent training. Let's say you spend 35 minutes working with a child, and then you want to spend the next 10 or 15 minutes working just with the adult or consulting the adult outside of the ears of the child or the minor, then that also is going to be considered relational. And sessions spent with each partner separately to screen for violence. Have the session with one, have the session with the other, along those lines. And hopefully this will kind of clarify what relational hours are and offer a little bit of expanding of the understanding of what it means to get those relational hours.
Sorry, I forgot I was muted. Okay, so these are some of the proposed rules. We discussed these at our October board meeting, and so we have sent these on to VHEC to be approved. The first one is a temporary license. This would enable a person who is licensed in another jurisdiction, such as another state, to practice in Texas for 20 non-consecutive days. So in Texas, if you are going to practice inside the great state of Texas, you have got to have a license, and that is in statute. That is something that we cannot change. And so in other words, even if a person wants to practice here temporarily, if they're here on vacation, if they have a client who's maybe home for, Christmas vacation or home for summer, or a client is visiting Texas, in order for them to be able to provide therapy in Texas or to somebody who is in Texas, they have to have a license. And so this temporary license would just basically enable somebody in another jurisdiction to be able to practice here temporarily. However, just because creating a new license is a long process. It takes time. We have to fix things in our database. Like it's a very long process. The absolute earliest that this would go into effect would probably be sometime in 2024. So that's the first one. The second thing that we talked about at our October meeting was in relation to the LMFT associate license. Currently, LMFT associates are required to renew their license at least once. And this can sometimes really slow down the process. And it kind of can sometimes also create a burden for staff. We've had people who have applied for their renewal in, like, say, January, and then in February, they turn around and apply for their upgrade. And so essentially what this would do is, under this new rules, it would create an LMFT associate license that is valid for 5 years with no CEU requirements because they are under supervision. This is consistent with the way the LPC does it. It is very efficient for staff, and we have not found that it would be a threat to public protection. And honestly, most of our LMFT associates are generally licensed within 2 to 3 years anyway. So I don't know that anybody's we might have a couple of people who might stretch it out for those 5 years, but like I said, most people are licensed within 2 to 3 years. So that's the LMFT associate license that is currently under proposal. It's my understanding that has been approved by BHEC, which means that it's probably been sent off to the governor's office for them to evaluate. And so it's possible that it could be open for public comment maybe sometime this spring. The last proposal that we considered in our October meeting relates to doctoral students. So one of the problems that we have sometimes seen is that somebody will get a PhD. Oh, I'm sorry, let me change. I don't know what's happening with my line, so you can actually see me. There we go. One of the things that we've seen with our doctoral students is that they will graduate with a PhD and they will go to work in a university setting where they are teaching and researching, and they really don't have a whole lot of time or energy to put towards getting clinical hours, even though as a part of their doctoral program, oftentimes they had to complete some sort of doctoral internship, or maybe they got, 2, 3, 4, 500 hours. But only a small percentage of those hours are actually able to count towards their licensure, even though they have a master's degree, they're being supervised by an LMFTS. And so one of the things that we have proposed is that doctoral students would be able to count the hours obtained after a master's degree while enrolled in a doctoral practicum or internship and under supervision, that they would be able to count those hours towards their license. And so we just really feel like this would help our doctoral our clinicians who have a PhD to be able to become licensed sooner, rather than sometimes it taking 5 or 6 years to become licensed because they are working and teaching and supervising and doing those other things. Okay, next slide. This is just something to point out. We have on our website 2 guidelines. One is a guidelines for technology assisted services, and the other one is guidelines for social media use. Again, these are just kind of guidelines, and if you follow these, you're going to stay out of trouble with the licensing board. And so I would just encourage all of y'all to visit the website and check out those guidelines. And next page. And then finally, there are just some things that we want to let y'all know are on our mind. One is licensure portability. Licensure portability includes being able to practice across state lines for, like, say, telehealth. It includes being able to move from one state to another and having your license transfer pretty easily. It also includes having, like, if you live along the border, maybe you live in Texarkana or El Paso or Wichita Falls, and you want to be able to practice maybe across, you want to be able to kind of across state lines because you live on the border, right? And so licensure portability is on our mind. Right now, there's not a whole lot of progress that I feel like we can make. We have been thinking about, oh my gosh, now my mind is blanking. Sarah, what are they called?
Counseling compact.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Elder. Yeah, counseling. We've been thinking about things like counseling compacts and just other ways to try to just increase the portability of our licenses. It's a really complex. The solutions, whatever solution we go with, is probably going to be incredibly complex, and so it's going to take time. But just know that those are things that are on the board's mind. We've also been thinking a lot about crisis CEUs, given some of the recent mass shootings, Uvalde, Sutherland Springs, El Paso. There was one in Midland, Odessa a couple of years ago. But just as we think about those things, as well as we also recognize that Texas has a large military population. So suicide rates among our military, just all of those things kind of have led us to be thinking about crisis and if there are ways that we can improve MFT's responses to, just to crisis management. The state legislature, though, is actually considering maybe some sort of legislation related to crisis management and crisis CEUs. So even though the board is concerned about that, at this point in time, we're going to wait and kind of see what the legislature does before we make a decision about how we want to move forward. The last thing that's on our mind is life coaching. It's not life coaching in and of itself that is necessarily our concern. However, we have seen a couple of things that have raised our eyebrows. One is sometimes we have seen clinicians, licensees who maybe get in trouble with the ethics board, and their response is just to simply give up their license and go into life coaching. So that has been a concern of ours. We have also seen where licensees in other states will practice across state lines and just say that what they're doing via telehealth across state lines is life coaching. So anyways, so those things are also a concern to us. So next slide, or last slide. So now we are going to open it up to Q&A. If you have, again, any questions, you can put them in the Q&A. If you have thoughts you want to share with us, we're happy to hear them. That is my email address. If there are future directions that you would like us to go, you're welcome to contact me. If you have questions specifically about your particular situation, then the best thing to do is to contact the board directly through the website. Okay, we're going to open up the floor then.
So if you have a question that you'd like to present to the board that you haven't written or typed out into the Q&A, if you would use the raised hand feature, so I can tell who you are, and then I can ask you to unmute and allow you to speak and ask your question to the board. It looks like we have some people using chat too. I didn't realize it was on. So Becky Davenport, you have a question for the board?
I do. Thank you. Thanks so much for doing this today. It's very helpful. My question is for those of us as LMFT supervisor, for example, that are offering continued education workshops that are falling under that new category or that new list that you created. Are there guidelines for us as far as documentation of those? What do we need to be keeping? I'd appreciate some guidance as the CE provider.
There's actually and Sarah, Tim, y'all can correct me, but in our rules, there's actually a list of what you need to keep. And so I don't remember offhand what all it is, but it's like a list of attendees. You need to provide a certificate that has like a date of, the date, the topic, the number of hours. And so in the rules, there's a very specific list of what you need to provide. Does anybody else want to comment on that?
No, I think that's it. You follow those. The main things are the date, the title, a little bit of the content, a list of attendees, and some kind of certificate. And then you hang on to that, archive it, and if it's ever in question, or if one of your attendees needs verification, that they have some paperwork that they can verify your bona fides with that.
And that should also include how many CEs were, like how many hours, units were provided. But it's my understanding we have this new rule that licensees have to keep their CE records for 3 years, but I don't think we have a rule of how long the provider has to keep the rules. That's not in the rules that I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you very much.
I'm reading from 801.261 E as in Edward 3, except for hours claimed under subsection H, which is the subsection that describes the activities you can do, such as self-study. All the others, all continuing education hours obtained must be designated by the provider in a letter, email, certificate, or transcript that displays the licensee's name, topic covered, dates of training, and hours of credit. And just a word about the record retention for 3 years. Be careful if you can't just go by the date of the training, because if you're carrying it forward to the next renewal period, then you might need to keep it from 3 years. You'll need to keep it for 3 years from the renewal period at which you used it for renewal. Does that make sense? Sort of?
Yes. Can you repeat 801? What
801.261.
261.
But I think that applies to licensees and what they're required to keep. Was there a separate section for providers and what they have to provide? Is that what you were quoting, Mrs. Fassholt?
No, there's only a section for licensees. There's not, we haven't listed requirements except implicitly in what's required for the licensee to keep.
I thought we used to have a section for providers about what they did, but
we did,
but we omitted it.
But it was the standardization work group formulated it this way in 801.261.
Well, then I'm really glad Mrs. Davenport asked her question, because now we all know.
Yeah.
Good. Hey, Becky, just scan them all, stick them in Dropbox, and forget about it for the next 10 years. You're good to go.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Thank you. Mara Riley, you have a question for the board?
Yeah, basically, I'm reading some of this. My question is more specific when we're required to do those hours. So TAS, is that phone also, or is it just the telehealth platform? And do we still have to have these hours if that's not our primary focus, but again, it was used during COVID or someone has a conflict, so you might do TAS sporadically?
If you're providing TAS, that's a great question. If you're providing TAS, basically, if you're doing therapy in any other way other than in person in the same place at the same time, that's considered technology assisted services, and you must have the 2 hours of CEs to support your competence to provide those services.
Thank you.
That does include telephone, text, email, as well as video. It's not limited to video. It's anything that's using technology as a therapeutic means. Which means basically everybody should probably get 2 hours in TAS. That's the way things are going anyway. We're not saying that's what you have to do. What I'm saying is, if there's a best practice thing, if there's just the wave of the future is using technology, being current with technology and what that is, I think that's just smart.
Thank you, Ms. Riley.
I can go ahead and answer. I see Susan Henderson has a question about CEUs and publications. And so she asked if 1 hour, is it 1 hour for one publication, or is it 1 hour for working on the publication? It is hour by hour. So if you spend 5 hours working on a publication, then that would be 5 hours of CEUs that you'd be able to count. At least that's my understanding. Tim, Sarah, do y'all have a different understanding? Okay, Jody is shaking her head. That's not your understanding, Jody?
No, it's not my understanding. My understanding is that you can count up to,
right,
and only up to 1 hour per renewal cycle, 1 hour for doing a publication. If you've done 5 publications and they took 20 hours each, you still get to count 1 hour. That's my understanding of it.
Oh, I thought we could count up to 5. Let me go back to the thing.
Or 5, whatever it says in that. It is 5, yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's 5, up to 5.
So that's your max.
Right. So if she spends 10 hours working on a publication, she can count 5 of those hours.
5. Right.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And the thing is, we're not limiting you. We're not saying, well, you need to not do that. What we're saying is we're gonna give you credit for that, because that is worthwhile. But out of the 30 hours that you need to get, we're not going to give you all 30 hours if you spend 30 hours doing that. But we will give you up to 5 hours credit for that.
And I just want to clarify too, because as doing trainings for other people, and licensees, it's come up that, hey, do we still get credit for providing supervision? Does providing supervision give us CE hours? And the answer under the new rules is no. If you're an LMFT supervisor and you're doing supervision, that does not count toward your CEs any longer.
We have a question from Giselle Antra. I may have mispronounced it. Miss Antra?
There are a few organizations on web sites that are offering CEUs for LMFTs and LPCs, and it says to go to your state to see if they're available. But so many are popping up now that I'm not sure which ones are valid and which ones are not. Do you have a list of the valid ones that are acceptable, or no? Do I have to contact the board to find out if I take a course from them that it would count towards my licensing?
Neither staff nor the board will pre-approve a continuing education. You'll need to review the rules in 801.261 and make your best judgment as to whether it applies.
And only 50% of your CEs have to come from that provider list. The other 50% can come from anybody that you want them to come from, and that can, count for your CEs.
Okay. Like PESI. I saw that there are several. If I take a course in PESI, does that count? Sure, it does. If it's systemic, if it's thematic with what our license is for that CE, and you're taking it online, or you're taking it reading and then taking an exam or something along those lines, absolutely. But half of your CEs can come from there. The other half need to be from these board approved approaches.
Okay. Would you repeat that ruling, please?
It's in 801.261.
261. Okay. 801.261. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I really like how y'all are asking for the rule number. I mean, it warms my heart. Good. You're digging down and you're researching. Do whatever you need to do to be knowledgeable and to protect your license. That's great.
Next question is from Kimberly Gist Miller. Ms. Miller?
Hello. Thank you for the opportunity. My question is, as an LMFT supervisor, prior to the pandemic, the rule about TAS was 500 hours. And as many of us know, a lot of our associates went above 500 hours in the last 2.5 years. And so I was just kind of curious about how that's working in terms of licensure.
Tim?
So I can
go ahead, Sarah.
I can relay that from what I hear from staff, the licensees or the upgrades that they're getting, most of them are within that 500-hour technology assisted services max. Those that have exceeded it, we're asking that the supervisor include note on the verification form of the 500 max, and on a separate letter include all of the technology assisted hours that the associate may have earned, with an explanation of why the max was exceeded, such as, well, COVID happened, but there might have been other reasons. And the board has included a rule, and I'm going to take a minute to find that in a second, regarding an associate who wasn't able to complete exactly the supervised conditions because of a declared disaster like COVID, but it could be in the future, so a hurricane or some other disaster that the governor declares. So that gives the board some flexibility to review those associates' supervised experience and make a judgment as to their acceptability and approvability.
And so, Ms. Gismiller, we did include an exception because we understand things happen, particularly if there's a governor declared disaster. However, we still strongly believe that the majority of the clinical experience hours need to come from in-person, face-to-face experiences, so people know how to be in the room with clients. So that 500 max technology assisted services is still in place, but we also created an exception for crazy times like COVID.
And the exception is spelled out in rule in 801.205, remedy for incomplete license requirements. That's 801.205. And the next question is from Kate Walker.
Hey there, thank y'all for doing this. I just had a question. As a 40-hour training provider, would the LMFT board ever consider putting a limit, the 90-day limit on taking the course like LPC does? Just to, you know, it would make things a little easier for me. But have y'all thought about imposing a limit on the number of days a participant needs in order to finish the training?
Dr. Merchant, could you shield that one?
Yeah, we have not considered that because I don't think I actually thought about that as being an issue until this moment. So, I mean, it's something that we could definitely look at. Dr. Elder?
Well, I know that we recently looked at, and maybe it was in the rules committee, so it hasn't gone to the full board yet, but we recently reviewed adding to our rules. Here are the elements that are required to be in the LMFT supervisor training. And as part of that, there is it must be completed within 90 days. So that is something that's under consideration, but has not come back to the full board yet to be passed. But it's part of the standardization committee's task as well. And so we're gonna probably, if it makes it through the process, adopt what LPC did.
Awesome, thanks.
Thank you. Oh, there we go. Next one is from Venus Ruhana Rafi. Ms. Rafi?
Yes, I have two questions. One of them you already answered regarding the excess 500 hours for the supervisors. I'm a supervisor, and a few of my supervisors, they have a problem. The site that they're working at, they have not gone to face-to-face yet. And they are doing tele. And I'm sure if they don't go to face-to-face, it's going to cause a problem for my supervisors down the road. But you already answered that. They need to try to find a site and do some face-to-face, which would be actually a good training, I believe. But if they don't, we can add a letter to explain the situation. So that I'm going to throw out that question. My other question is again regarding the supervision hours. On the rules, it explains in the practicum, the students, they have to have 3 semesters of supervision of practicum, and it doesn't say anything about how many hours of a supervision. But we know also in the rules, it says they can transfer up to 100 hours of a supervision from the practicum to their internship. How do you determine those 100 hours? Any hours that they get as a supervision and when they are doing the practicum, are they up to 100 hours transferable or not? Because it seems like we are comparing apple to oranges. Semester hours of a practicum, supervised practicum, and then hours of supervision. So it's not really clear.
So in 801.114, subsection B is for applicants who have began a program of study on or after August 1st of 2017, which is most of our applicants these days. And in subparagraph 8 regarding supervised clinical internship, you're correct, it has 12 months or 9 semester hours, but it also includes the applicant must have 300 hours of experience, of which at least 150 hours must be direct client contact hours. And of the 150 direct client contact hours, at least 75 hours must be direct client contact with couples and families. It does not specify how many hours of supervision the student must receive. When the student is ready to apply for the associate license, we ask that they complete a practicum form, and the form's on our webpage. They send that to their school, and actually a school official completes that form. And that form details how many total hours, how many direct hours, it might say how many indirect hours, and then how many supervision hours. And from that practicum form that's completed by the school official, staff can determine how many up to 100 supervision hours can be applied toward the LMFT license.
Thank you for clarification. Maybe as a suggestion, there is a part that it says they can transfer up to 100 hours of excess supervision hours. That excess is the one that is confusing.
Thank you. I can understand that. It's a broader term of in excess of the academic requirement. And since there's no supervision in the academic requirement, although the accrediting body and certainly the school would probably require that certain supervision take place, the student wouldn't just be turned loose. So staff is taking what the student actually did in their practicum or their internship and subtracting out the academic requirement in order to calculate a possible excess award. So I appreciate the wording. I'll look at that again and ask staff and the board to look at that.
Can I ask another question? When they can transfer up to 400 hours, depending on the accreditation of the school, 400 or 500 hours transfer, the supervision hours cannot be included in that. We're just talking about indirect and direct.
The supervision hours are included in that. It's a total award of 400 hours.
Okay, so if they're transferring 400 hours, including the 100 hours of supervision, can they still count those 100 hours for the supervision hours also?
I don't understand the question.
If you are including the 100 hours of the supervision in that 400 hours that they can transfer, can they also use that 100 hours of a supervision toward the supervision hours for internship, meaning you double dipping in a way?
If the 100 hours is part of the 400, staff is already counting it. I'm not understanding that question.
Let me explain.
You can't count the same hour twice.
Correct. So if they want to benefit from the 100 hours of a supervision, and then they also want to benefit fully for 400 hours of transferring the hours, they should probably have 500 hours total to get benefit of both.
Staff can only award up to 400 hours, regardless of the categorization of the hour.
I see.
So it could be 150 of indirect hours. It could be 50. The excess award could be 50 direct hours and 35 supervision hours that are in excess of the academic requirement. And if all of that adds up to more than 400, staff has to take some off until they get 400.
I see. I guess where I was getting confused before this rule changes, supervision hours was completely separate from the 400 hours or 500 hours that you were transferring. That was on top of that. So that was my confusion. So total of 400, and if they have up to 100 hours of supervision in the practicum, they can transfer that. Am I clear? Am I understanding?
So if they have a total of 400, and of that 400, they are transferring the maximum of 100 supervision hours, the other hours cannot total more than 300.
300, correct. Thank you.
We're saying the same thing?
Yes, I appreciate the clarification. Sorry
Excellent.
about the confusion.
Not at all. I don't see anyone else with their hand raised, but I do have two people who have attended by phone.
I see Melissa.
I do see that.
And Mary Sowell.
Okay. Melissa Gaber.
I was wondering how that was going to work. That's very cool. Thank you for unmuting me. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you, Tim, for answering all the questions I'm firing at you in the chat as well. I'm a little confused on the TAS. So once COVID happened, I did this gigantic course. I don't even remember how many CEs, maybe at least 30, that gave me, how do you basically set up your private practice online, all the ethics, all the guidelines, everything. And I took that one, but I did just a very quick Google search, and I'm not sure what you mean by like 2 CEs for TAS. I'm assuming that's every time I renew my license. Because I took a giant course, but there's something out there that's just like a refresher for me? Is that what you're asking for? Yeah, okay.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
So
Go ahead.
In the requirements for continuing education for renewal of the license, there's a requirement that a licensee who provides telehealth services must complete 2 hours of continuing education in technology-assisted services. Does that clarify it any? So when you're renewing your license, if you're providing technology-assisted services, you're required to have 2 hours of continuing education for that renewal period. And if in the next renewal period, you're still providing technology-assisted services, 2 more hours.
Okay, I'll just do a larger Google search to see if I can find something that's not like a huge course like I took already, since I only need 2 out of that. And so typically, and I apologize to Tim if he answered this because I might be confused. Right now, I have a bunch of courses on PESI. So they will do these really great summits or training courses, certification, somethings, and they'll record them. And then you can go on to PESI and you can purchase that seminar, and then you can watch it at your leisure, something that they did a 2-day seminar at a hotel or something. I'm not sure where that falls under your category of the 50%. That made me a little nervous because I do like IFS trainings or EFT, or I have some stuff on there about advanced grief counseling. I'm not sure where that is on your 50% because it's all online through PESI.
It's
Okay.
my go
Go
ahead,
ahead.
Russ.
Well, go ahead. I'll let you go and then I'll.
Okay, it's my understanding that those would not fall into the 50% that are, that 50% have to come from this particular, that are specified. It would fall into the other half. Like, I don't think that would fit into the 50% that are listed in the rules.
That was my concern.
Yeah.
Okay.
And a way that you could always try to be more strategic, for example, would be if you can find an in-state online that is conducted by a university or a hospital or an LMFTS or an LPCS or any other type of supervisor, licensed supervisor within the state of Texas, that would fall under our new 50% category, because that training would be offered by someone who does meet the criteria that we're defining.
Is PESI endorsed by any of these, like an international or a national
or
association of health professionals, like APA or?
Well, I know 3 of the ones that I have right now, they are given by leaders in the field. So they are clinicians themselves. They're not from Texas, but they are, I guess you would say international, maybe national.
But if it's endorsed by AAMFT or some large agency, if it's on the PESI website that one of those organizations endorses it, it would meet our criteria.
Okay. So if
see
there's an
now
organization,
it will say that, hey, this is good for LMFT in Florida, New Jersey, Colorado, or whatever it is, it will say that. That's not the same thing. That one is 50% on your own.
So yeah, I can look, like Sue Johnson has a certificate course in EFT on there. I can see if that is
If that's endorsed by AAMFT,
Okay.
then that would be a national organization, association that provides the endorsement. And I think that would fit within our new criteria. If
So
not,
what we're looking at is
the other.
Is subparagraph F7, any provider approved or endorsed by the provider listed in the above list, if that's helpful. And again, this is 801.261.
Yeah, this is great. I'm going to send in my stuff to be a supervisor, and that's terrifying. So I appreciate the rule numbers because that's where I need to get my brain. Okay, so yeah, I will look at those and see. I might just have to call PESI and find out if a national organization endorses, but someone like Sue Johnson or Frank Marshall, I would imagine somebody endorses their content on there. Okay. I think Tim answered everything else for me. Thank you, Tim.
Good.
Mary Soul, you have a question?
Yes, can y'all hear me?
Awesome.
Yes. Okay, so I want to first of all apologize. I'm jumping on late. I just got out of a session. I'm so glad you guys were still online. So is this recorded? I'm worried I'm going to be asking a question that's already been asked. Okay.
It's recorded.
Okay, cool. So then I'll ask the question, but if it's already been answered, you can tell me, just watch it later. One of them is in regards to, so I'm an associate. And so one of them is in regards to the amount of supervisory hours required. That's seeming we need 200 based on the rule book, but that would mean it would take 4 years to get there. Yeah.
Unless you're able to carry over up to 100 hours from your practicum and internship courses.
Okay, up to 100. Okay. And that, okay. I think I can. That'll be fine. Okay, next question is about when do the supervisory hours begin? Is it once I have received my license in the mail or whatever, confirmed license, or is it once I'm practicing outside of school? And
you must have a license to practice.
Right. Okay.
So there's and as soon as staff has issued the license in our database, you're licensed.
Okay.
So you don't have to wait the 2 weeks or whatever that it might take for it to get mailed to you.
Okay.
We have an online license verification, and it's open to the public, so anyone can see that you're licensed at the time that the staff pushes the button in the database.
Okay, yeah, I was trying to get around red tape because I was doing the QMHP work, so it wasn't licensed work, but the qualified mental health practitioner work under a licensed person. So I was like, can I count those hours? But no, can't get around it. Okay, thanks, y'all. That's all I've got.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I saw it so much in the chat that I want to comment really quickly. There is no distinction between live and recorded CEs. There's no requirement that you have a certain % of live CEs. So it came up so much. I just think we should say it all for everybody.
Thank you.
I noticed that Venus and Giselle also had their hands raised. Do we have time to answer their questions?
Well, I was just going to say it's almost 1 o'clock. In the past, we've gone for a little while longer, and as if the board members have the time, as long as there's questions going. And for those that need to log off, don't worry if you're not here at the very end. If you've attended for the majority of the session, I get a spreadsheet that shows how long you've been on, and I can assign a continuing education unit for up to 1 hour for attending the session for the list. So don't worry if you need to get off. And don't worry that you're not going to be able to have your CE, and we will continue to answer questions. But I wanted to give those who hadn't had a chance yet before I go back to those who've already had a chance to speak, if that's all right with the board members. Okay. The next one I see is Twyla Woolsey. Your question for the board?
Yes, thank you. Mine is more of a comment about the CEUs. With PESI, a lot of times on their CEU, just so people will know, they will say specifically that it is sponsored by APA or another governing body. And so a lot of those will count towards, I would think would count towards our 50%. But they give a very detailed explanation on their courses. The other question I have about CEUs, I'm licensed in several states because of the telemedicine that I do. And I'm finding it so complicated navigating each state's CEU requirements. And I appreciate the board, you know, making rules that are being specific about the kind of CEUs that we are to receive. But even earlier, y'all were talking about like crisis and maybe potentially even assigning more regulation or requirements about crisis counseling and things like that. As a practitioner, I hope y'all will take into consideration the freedom that we have, that so many of us are in so many different specialties, that it doesn't become so restrictive, that all of our CEUs are now starting to be designated, but that we have the freedom to really grow in the areas that we do as therapists. It just seems like there's more and more regulation happening of our licensure, and I appreciate some of that, but I do have concerns that I hope we don't become too over-regulated. So just a comment.
Thank you.
Yeah, Twyla, we've had that same kind of concern, because we want y'all to be able to, like, you know, if you're doing trauma, we want y'all to be able to specialize in trauma CEUs, you know. And so even like with the consideration of adding crisis, like a crisis CEU, we've considered, would there be a way to account that or include that in ethics, you know, so that part of your ethics CEU is getting maybe a crisis CEU as well. So yeah, so thank you for that comment. And yeah, the board, we also don't want to like over prescribe what you have to do.
Thank you.
Michelle Nguyen, you have a question for the board?
Yes, I wanted to clarify. Thanks for answering my question. First, I wanted to clarify licensing and this temporary license that's going to be ready in 2024. Currently, if you have a license in Texas, the license holder does not have to be in Texas to provide the counseling, correct? Just the client.
I'm sorry, ask that again.
So, as my understanding now, to do telehealth or any kind of TAS in Texas, the client has to have their feet in Texas, but the provider, the license holder, does not. Is that correct?
So like if you're living in Oklahoma, but you are licensed in Texas, then yes, you could practice in Texas via telehealth if your client's in Texas.
Okay, is that going to continue even with this twin? Because
can I chime in?
Okay, that was kind of confusing. Was that?
Can I come in on that just a moment? Because if you're in Oklahoma and you don't have an Oklahoma license, it might be problematic for you to practice from there.
No, I'm in Utah, but I have a license in Utah and Texas.
Then you're good.
Yeah. Okay. So
no, this would not, the temporary license would be for somebody who is licensed in another jurisdiction and maybe their client is only visiting Texas. They're home for summer break.
Right.
You know, they are on vacation here for a month to take care of their mom. I don't know. Like, but maybe the client's here temporarily and somebody doesn't want to have to get a whole license just to provide continuity of care.
Right.
And so that's essentially what this is about. But if you want to, like, since you're in Utah, if you want to continue to see clients regularly in Texas, you would just be licensed to both Texas and Utah to do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that was good. And my other question is about, can we treat clients from other countries?
It all depends on whatever the rule is and whatever jurisdiction they're in. So if they are in a jurisdiction where a license is required to practice marriage and family therapy, then yes, you would have to be licensed in both that jurisdiction and in whatever jurisdiction you are in the United States. If they are in a country that does not have LMFT licensure, there is no rule to follow, you know, but you have to follow the rules of both jurisdictions where you're at and the jurisdiction where the client's at.
And that's been difficult because I do get requests, you know, for intensives and so forth. And they're like, yeah, we don't have that. We don't have that. And I don't even know who to ask or how to even, and they don't have the same definitions. There's some countries don't even do CEUs. So I don't even know how I can go about and clarify that in other countries.
Yeah, sometimes it just takes a lot of Googling to find out if a licensure even exists in that country. And unfortunately, there's a lot of countries where licensure doesn't even, like there is no licensure rule. You don't have to have a license to practice marriage and family therapy in many places.
Okay.
One other thing to point out, all of these questions about telehealth going from one state to another, one country to another, are answered in our FAQs. They are the first 4 questions on our FAQs, so you don't have to dig.
Okay.
But if you have telehealth questions, go to the FAQs on the website, and the first 4 answer almost every question we get, which is, I'm in Texas, can I see somebody in another state? I'm in another state, can I see somebody in Texas? How does it work on a military base? That kind of stuff. Those questions are all answered in our FAQs.
All right, thank you.
Rita Vigil, you have a question for the board? Rita, are you there?
Can she unmute?
She might have stepped away.
Sorry, I was having trouble unmuting myself.
Excellent. We
So
can hear you.
my question was kind of piggybacking on an earlier question. Somebody had said about the CEU hours. They had said, so somebody answered about how 500 hours were counted for CEUs, and I'm a new associate. And there was a little confusion because I heard also some information about it. I don't know if it's a change happening or it's already happened where associates won't need to worry about CEUs. Am I incorrect in understanding that part?
Currently, you do. Currently, under current rule, LFT associates have to get 15 hours of CEUs and during their renewal period. We have proposed a rule that would take the LMFT associate license and turn it into a 5-year license where you are not required to get CEUs. However, that is a proposed rule. And so the earliest that would probably maybe could go into effect would probably be sometime in maybe late 2023 or 2024. So again, it's a long rulemaking process. So I can't tell you when that would go into effect or if it even would. But currently, if you're an LMFT associate right this moment, then you are under the rule that says you have to have 15 hours of continuing education. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yes. So I have a following question to that then, because there was something about CEUs have to be from a list. Am I understanding that correctly?
Not from a list. If you look in the rules, there are 50% of your hours have to come from certain types of providers. And that list is in the rules that tells you what those providers need to be. So things like,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, so things like hospitals, a professional association like TAMFT or AAMFT or APA, public schools, charitable organizations. There's a whole list in the rules.
Okay, so like PESI or AMFT also counts, correct?
AAMFT counts. PESI does not. So that would be they would fall under the other half. Unless, I guess, as we were talking about earlier, unless they are somehow that particular presentation you're doing is endorsed by AAMFT or APA or something along those lines. So you would have to be really careful in looking at which CEUs you're selecting.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm going to check on the 2 that have attended by phone. So caller, do you have any questions for the board? If you can, *6 will let you unmute if you have any questions.
Giselle's hand is still raised.
Yes, and she had an opportunity earlier. I just wanted, since I can't see a raised hand on the phone callers. Caller, do you have a question? Okay, I'll try the other one and then I'll get back to Giselle. Caller, do you have a question for the board? If you do, *6 will allow you to unmute.
Sarah, this is Daryl. I don't have any questions.
Oh, thank you, Daryl. Okay, Ms. Entre, you have another question?
Just wanted to clarify, because I know you've spoken about it before, so forgive me. How many hours can we do on telehealth and how many hours that we have to do in person?
For
as an associate?
I'm sorry. No, for a regular license.
You're asking for a renewal, continuing education
renewal,
requirements?
Right.
There's not. You can do all of them virtually as long as they are coming from one of those providers.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for doing this. It's been helpful.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So at this time, I don't see any other hands raised. Tim, were there any frequent questions that might be worthwhile for the attendees to hear the answer to?
Yes, there is no requirement for face-to-face continuing education. Online continuing education is continuing education that is accepted. Also, self-study means something you do on your own. You don't get a certificate at the end of it. So if you get a certificate at the end of it, it's formal CE, it's not self-study.
Good. Okay.
This is Jody. I thought it might be worth clarifying. There's a question in the chat about, does this include family therapy when seeing clients for an individual session? So I think that I don't know exactly who posted that, but I'm wondering that would be Mrs. Virginia Monk. And I think that goes back to the definition of relational hour. And it's my understanding if you're seeing an individual person, unless it falls under one of those specific circumstances, like maybe you did an intake with a couple and then you meet individually with each one of them to screen for contraindications of couples therapy, that would count. But otherwise, if it's just an individual person coming in on a regular basis as an individual, even if you're working with them from a systemic perspective, it does not count as a relational hour.
And so I will just clarify, add to that also, if you're seeing the family system, like let's suppose you are seeing the family and then you schedule an individual session with one member of the family, that would also not count as relational. It has to be within that same therapeutic session. So again, you spend 15 minutes screening for violence, 15 minutes, with one partner, 15 minutes with the other one, and then half an hour for them together. Like that is the same therapeutic session. But if I am seeing the family together this week, and then next week I'm seeing, dad alone, that would not count as a relational hour.
Carla Hunter has a question. Ms. Hunter, can you unmute?
Hi, everyone. I have a question, and I don't know if this was covered. I've been in and out. I graduated in 2020 during COVID. For my hours, as far as the associate licensure, will I be held to the COVID standard or the current standard for hours?
At the time that you apply for upgrade, staff will apply the rules that are in effect at the time your application is received. If you were to apply today, staff would look at the hours verified by your supervisors and apply the rule that says no more than 500 technology-assisted services hours. Unless you and your supervisor provide a separate letter with explanation and a listing or an accounting of all of your technology-assisted hours. And then staff can look at whether 801.205 remedy, it starts with remedy, I can't remember the rest of it. But it's specifically a rule that is for those that were caught in COVID and that had little choice but to do technology-assisted hours. The rule gives the board some flexibility. I can't guarantee at this time or pre-approve that hours would be accepted. I can only say that staff will review what you submit at the time that your upgrade and fee and all your required documents are received.
Thank you.
And the rule to check and look at with your supervisor is 801.205, as well as the requirements in 801.142.
Okay, well, is that it? Are there any additional questions that we need to answer from anyone in the Q&A? Anything else?
I don't see any other hands raised. I'm just scrolling through the attendees again.
Tim, is there anything from the Q&A we need to answer?
There are a few here that I'm still kind of chewing on. Let's see here. For example, part of the problem is I'm remembering old rules and trying to make sure I've put those down the memory hole. And so we've got a question asking if continuing education hours that were accrued for the clinical social work license would be acceptable. And it used to be, but I don't know that it is anymore.
Okay, so I'm looking at her question. She says, I completed 40 hours through the National Association of Social Work this year to become an LCSW supervisor. Will these 40 hours count towards LMFT licensure? Well, the NASW
it will not count to become a supervisor for an LMFT, and I don't think it would count as CEU for a renewal either anymore. Is that correct?
Well, the NASW is a professional association.
It might depend on the specific topic of the course.
That's true, because I do believe that it's still in the rule that it has to be applicable to the field of marriage and family therapy.
We used to have a rule where we would accept CE that was accepted by any of the other two boards, the LPC and social work. I don't know if that rule is still in there. I didn't see it when I was.
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
So the answer to that would be maybe.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that's super helpful. And the other question that we got, will this Q&A be available on our website? And typically we post that, I think, in the board news section. Is that correct, Sarah? Or does the Q&A get embedded on the YouTube?
I don't know the answer to that. I've not published it in the past as a written document or as a PDF. And I don't know off the top of my head if in the recording you can access the Q&A.
Let me see here. Let me grab these answered ones and see if I can cut and paste them into Word at the very least.
Just for the record, Mrs. Basholtz is so incredibly competent that this is the first time in like 12 years I've ever heard her say, I don't know the answer to that.
Daryl is chiming in saying no to both.
Thank you. So we do have on our website a link to the rules. Let me pull, and I can share that. So our website at www.bhec.texas.gov, what you're hopefully seeing right now is the homepage. And these 4 lists of the member boards here are actually quick links. If you click on the top one for marriage and family therapists, and then slide down to this quick link, statutes and rules, we have a very helpful consolidated rule book for marriage and family therapy, which is a large PDF that's searchable. You can see that it's recently been updated, but you may know that new rules also became effective in November 23rd. So be careful about relying on this all by itself. And how do I get?
However, this document is updated regularly and is usually fairly up to date. So
yes. Sorry, I couldn't reach the tab with the screen share. And if you scroll down on this page a little bit, There's also links to the relevant chapters for the different member boards and for BHEC in total. And then there's administrative rules. So you have links here to the actual rules that's maintained by the Secretary of State. So here are the links to the official copy of the rules, and chapter 801 is the one for marriage and family therapists, if that helps you find that. Also earlier, Dr. Elder noted the human trafficking course, and we have a webpage about the human trafficking awareness course and frequently asked questions about what's required of that. And she also mentioned, I'm going back to the homepage, she also mentioned instructions on how to do a public comment. And that's on the, sorry, I'm going too fast. From the homepage, slide over to the quick links for forms and publications, and you'll see policy and guidelines, guidelines on effectively communicating through comments on proposed rules. So if that's helpful for you, that's there. Our website is chock full of information. Poke around and see what you can find.
And Mrs. Fasholtz, also, if you wouldn't mind going back really quickly, I would love for everyone who's currently on this call to sign up for email updates from the board, because you get in your own inbox a notice that proposed rules have been published for public comment, as well as new rules just went into effect. So it's a great way to keep up with, and it's just right there on the right-hand side where it says email updates, and you can click on it, become part of our listserv, and then we just send it right to you every time that a change happens.
So you would complete this little web form, click submit. It sends you an email to confirm that you really wanted to subscribe, follow those prompts, and then you're ready to go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I think that wraps it up then. Thank you all for being here and being present. We really like when our licensees engage with us. So thank you for attending. Thank you to Sarah and Tim and Dr. Elder and Dr. Barti for being willing to be on this panel. So that's it. Y'all take care and have a great rest of your Friday.
Thank you.